The scripture reading this morning is probably very familiar to all of us, at least many of us, but I'd like to encourage you to listen again for the first time. It's from John 9. As Jesus walked along, he saw someone who had been blind from birth. The disciples asked Jesus, "Rabbi, was it this individual's sin that caused the blindness, or that of the parents?" "Neither," answered Jesus. "It wasn't because of anyone's sin, not this person's, nor the parents'. Rather, it was to let God's work shine forth in this person. We must do the deeds of the one who sent me, while it is still day, for night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." With that, Jesus spat on the ground, made mud with his saliva, and smeared the blind one's eyes with the mud. Then Jesus said, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So the person went off to wash and came back able to see. The temple authorities refused to believe that this one had been blind and had begun to see until they summoned the parents. "Is this your child?" they asked. "And if so, do you attest that your child was blind at birth? How do you act for the fact that now your child can see?" The parents answered, "We know this is our child, blind from birth. But how our child can see now, or who opened those blind eyes, we have no idea. But don't ask us. Our child is old enough to speak without us." The parents answered this way because they were afraid of the temple authorities, who had already agreed among themselves that anyone who acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why they said, "Our child is of age and shall be asked directly." A second time, they summoned the one who had been born blind and said, "Give God the glory instead. We know that this Jesus is a sinner." "I don't know whether he is a sinner or not," the individual answered. "All I know is that I used to be blind, and now I can see." They persisted. "Just what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" "I've already told you, but you won't listen to me," came the answer. "Why do you want to hear it all over again? Don't tell me you want to become disciples of Jesus too." They retorted scornfully, "You're the one who is Jesus' disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we have no idea where this Jesus comes from." The other retorted, "Well, this is news. You don't know where you come from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't hear sinners, but that if people were to vote and obey God's will, God listens to them. It is unheard of that anyone ever gave a sight to the person blind from birth. If this one were not from God, he could never have done such a thing." "What?" they exclaimed. "You're steeped in sin from birth, and you're giving us lectures?" With that, they threw the person out. When Jesus heard of the expulsion, he sought out the healed one and asked, "Do you believe in the chosen one?" The other answered, "Who is this one, that I may believe?" "You're looking at him," Jesus replied. "The chosen one is speaking to you now." The healed one said, "Yes, I believe," and worshiped Jesus. And Jesus said, "I came into this world to execute justice, to make the sightless see and the seeing blind." Some of the prophecies who were nearby heard this and said, "You're not calling us blind, are you?" To which Jesus replied, "If you were blind, there would be no sin in that. But since you say we see, your sin remains." Would you pray with me?
Divine light, open our eyes that we might see, our ears that we might hear, our hearts that we might feel your presence. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So I appreciate your intro, Robin, because it's true that we've probably heard this story or a version of it before, and so it's important to try and hear it anew. You know, if we take this story at simply face value, it's the story of Jesus healing a blind guy, and he can see again. And oh, by the way, it wasn't his fault he was blind in the first place, nor was it his parents' fault, which all must have been a thing back then, right? Or it wouldn't have been said at all. But if we want to dig deeper into this story, we need to think a little bit about the Gospel of John in general. John was the last of the 4 Gospels that were written, so around 90 to 100 of the Common Era. So a good 60 to 70, maybe even up to 110, so maybe even 80 years after Jesus died. It's the last one to be written. He's also known as the most mystical, the most symbolic gospel. So if we want to understand the Gospel of John, it means we need to think mystically, metaphorically, symbolically. We can't take it at face value because that's not how he was writing it. The other thing we need to remember is that 90% of the book of John is original to the book of John. 90% of the material, stories in there are from a later Christian movement, a later Jesus movement, stories that developed in later years that were never meant to be taken literally, but developed in order to share a purpose, to share a perspective of Jesus from the author's point of view. So we need to think about those things as we're looking at this. It's clear as you read the Gospel of John that John's perspective on Jesus is that Jesus is a new dimension of humanity. He's a new consciousness. He's a new revelation of the divine. He's a new understanding of God and our relationship with God. The I am statements that we hear in the Gospel of John only happen in the Gospel of John. So in this one, we hear, I am the light of the world. But there's also, I am the bread of life, and I am the truth and the way and the life. I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am the vine. All of those sayings happen in only the Gospel of John. He emphasizes the I am portion because it takes us back to Moses in the burning bush. If you remember way back then, God appears in the burning bush and says, Moses, you need to go and free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. And Moses says, do I really have to? Tell me, who should I say sent me? Sounds like a trick question, doesn't it? And God says, I am who am. It's the same I am that Jesus now uses in the Gospel of John. So for John, Jesus is a new way to see God. It's an experience of God through this human being, Jesus. Okay, so all of that informs how we're going to look at this passage and how we're going to look at the people in this passage for which you're going to help me. So I want to pull out 2 phrases that I think help us understand what John wanted us to get out of this story. And the first comes at the very beginning, when Jesus says, while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And then immediately the story describes what that looks like. It describes the story of a person who was blind coming to see. And then at the very end, Jesus says, I came to bring justice so that the blind see and the seeing are made blind. So we're going to work on those 2 passages. So the first piece of that, I am the light of the world. In all of the Gospels, Jesus says over and over and over again, don't you people get it? Do you not yet see? Do you not yet understand? And it's clear that he said that because no, they didn't. They couldn't wrap their heads around this new way of being in the world, this new consciousness that he brought. They couldn't wrap their heads around this new understanding of God. And yet he continues, that's his mission, is to help them to see, help to bring them into the same place he is, into the same consciousness. So here's my first big question for you. What is that new consciousness? What does that look like? Mike?
I think it aims to show the insight, no pun intended, of what Jesus was. Miraculous, miracle working, and he was above the law.
So you think that Jesus wanted them to see was all about him?
No, about what God could bring to them, through him, or around him. So he was the light to show that he could perform miracles when he couldn't, on the Sabbath or whatever. He was above the law.
That's an interesting way to look. But he said he was the fulfillment of the law.
Correct.
He never said he was above the law.
But he wanted to prove that he was making a movement. He was ready to show the light of God through himself and through others. And the law was kind of almost...
The law was secondary.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Jesus was about the spirit of the law. The law should serve people, not people serve the law. Okay, what else?
Sin doesn't belong to innocence. I mean, sin is not a natural, the innocent blind person was not because of his sin or his parents' sin.
Right, illness was not about sinfulness. So that was a piece of this passage specifically, yes. What else is part of the new consciousness that Jesus tried to bring? The justice piece of it is certainly part of it.
Love, just love versus rules and regulations and whatever.
So love versus rules and regulations is what Julie's saying. Barbara, did you say?
Judgmental, but also I was thinking about who was the ruling government at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan and Jesus, that was a Roman. And so we can't take the Roman God and say Caesar is God. That's what I'm thinking about all of this.
Okay, so you're all into the governmental stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to leave you there with that. So a justice consciousness of love, which is equality and inclusion and those sorts of things, not oppression by the government. Don?
I think he's also telling people that they need to see for themselves. That, it's what they see, how they see that is real, not what someone necessarily tells them that they have to see for themselves.
Okay, so that's the mystical piece, right? So when you're mystical, it means that you're having a personal experience of the divine, as opposed to it being mediated through a priest or a saint or the rabbi, or you're taking everything at face value, what you're being told by your laws or your traditions or your whatever. Is that close, Don?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sharon?
But it's looking at each other and noticing that there isn't that much difference, and that there is a compassion that is exchanged that way.
Yes. So it's an ability, he wanted to, part of his consciousness was an understanding that we are all one. And not just one with each other, but one with the divine. And within that ability to see comes a compassion for one another, a much greater compassion for one another. Good. So it's all of that and more. And that's what he's trying to help people to see, that oneness, that equality. To see, as I talked to Charlie and Alex about, to see through the eyes of love everything and to act out of that love. So let's look at the blind beggar for a second. this nameless character that we have who's so crucial to this story. How does this blind beggar respond to Jesus?
Trust.
That was top of my list. Trust. This person that he doesn't know, can't see, and yet he trusts.
Believing in him without seeing him.
Believing without seeing, literally, yes. And part of trust comes risk. Right? So he took some risk in this relationship with Jesus. And that comes to pass, because he gets himself kicked out of the synagogue for that relationship with Jesus. What else? Marilyn?
He wanted to know the deeper meaning of what Jesus was about. He was doing it in the world.
So he wanted to know the deeper meaning of what Jesus was about. He was willing to not just, okay, thanks, you maybe see I'm out of here now. That seeing took him into a deeper place in that Jesus movement. I think he had an openness of heart and an openness of mind to be able to just, let some guy put a bunch of saliva mud on your eyes, right? And then, oh yeah, you just go wash that off in the pool. What a scam any of us would say today, right? You gotta be flipping kidding me. You're not touching me with that stuff. There's a lot of trust and risk going on there, right? And a willingness to be open and to try. Sort of a beginner's mind, Jerry, right? The openness to something new and what might happen. And he's got a lot of integrity. What happens when people confront him afterwards? Hey, aren't you that guy that was born blind? Knowing that if you say anything good about Jesus, you're risking getting kicked out of the synagogue at this point. Risking being ostracized. His parents didn't even want to stand up for him. They put the synagogue before their own son. They didn't want to be ostracized from the community, but the son stood by his experience and his own personal open heart experience of the divine. So, juxtaposed to that are the Jewish temple authorities, who are none of those things we just said. They're none of that new consciousness, right? And they're none of this trusting, risking, looking at something new with a beginner's mind, anything that Jesus might say, no, forget it. They were stuck in their understanding of God. They were stuck in the way that their religion told them they were supposed to be, and anything else was suspect. They should be skeptical of it and critical of it, and they were threatened by it. And so anybody who didn't believe that way, you're out of there. Now know that that's exactly what was happening at the time John was writing this. In the Jewish synagogues, you had two factions. You had the people who were Jesus movement people, who were still Jews, but they believed in Jesus. And you had the devout Jews who wanted nothing to do with that Jesus movement people. And those devout Jews were kicking all of the others out of the synagogue. It's exactly what was happening. So part of the message of that story was, hey, some of us have come to believe and to see. Jesus was light for us. He brought a new consciousness to us. He helped us to see something new and experience something new, and we're standing by it, and we're not going to be threatened, and we're not going to worry about being kicked out. We believe, and we're holding to that. And Jesus is with us when we do that. The Spirit of God is with us when we do that. So here's a tricky question. That second passage I said I wanted to lift up. Jesus said, I came to bring sight to the blind and blindness to those who can see. Clearly at the end of that little passage, the Pharisees understood that they were the ones now who were blind, right? Jesus was going, again, you all are still blind because you don't get it. And they're not happy about it. But what kind of blindness does he want to bring to these people who feel like they can quote unquote see? What does that blindness look like? Reese?
It's the arrogance to say, even when confronted with a miracle and the facts of the miracle, that you still stand on your old laws and your own beliefs that this is the way things are, and refusal to see a different path, or even ask.
Right, so he's kind of pointing out that despite all of these amazing things, you still don't see. And I think what I see that he's trying to bring to them is a questioning, a challenging to their arrogance, to their belief that they've got it all figured out and they've got it all right. He's trying to bring uncertainty where there was certainty. Is that what you were going to say, Mike?
Well, close, but more just acceptance of equality. Everybody can get to heaven, or everybody
There's
can get
that
to God.
too.
And there's, and I am the light. I'm the way that we can fix this problem, in a sense. To say, everybody's accepted.
So to try and keep throwing at them a new way that they're not seeing. Robin was, Don, go ahead.
I keep having this thought that we've come full circle, that today the modern church is very much like the Pharisees. They're stuck in one view and not willing to accept
A new consciousness,
A new
a new understanding, yes. Yes, it's very similar to, once you create a big institution, it's like the Titanic, right? You can't turn it, you can't move it, it gets stuck. So yeah, there's some similarity, I would agree. So Robin was recently telling a story about a woman from Franksville, when it was Franksville, who was she's probably in her 70s, very devout, very, volunteered a lot, very committed to the church, just a good person, taught adult Sunday school for I don't know how many years by the time I got there, and then a lot of years after I got there. And she had some really tragic things happen in her life. Her son killed himself, and then 2 years later, her granddaughter did the same thing. And Roman said that this woman caught her one time and said, I used to think I had everything figured out, and now I don't know anything. And in some ways, that's what Jesus was trying to do with all of those people who said they saw, who thought they had it all figured out. To say, because frankly, the more I know, the less I know. As far as I'm concerned, the spiritual path brings us deeper and deeper into more and more questions, and a comfort level in not knowing and being okay with mystery and all of those things. That's where Jesus was pushing the people who said they could see. Okay, so having said all of this, here's the bottom line for each of us today. The question is to see or not to see for each one of us, because it's a choice. We can put on our love glasses, or we can leave them at a friend's house who conveniently goes to Ohio and we never see them again. Because here's the deal. If we all say, oh yeah, we see, we're enlightened, we're progressive, the proof is in the pudding, folks. If we don't act like we see, then we don't see. If the words that come out of our mouth are not kind and compassionate and generous and helpful, then we don't see. If our actions are not those of a person who is watching for the people who are hurting around them and finding ways to maybe alleviate that in some way, shape, or form, then we're not people who see. If we can't strive for understanding instead of anger, and love and courage instead of fear, then we're not people who see. If we don't have open hearts and open-mindedness, if we don't deal with the compressor with patience and understanding, then we're not people who see. And it's really hard to be people who see all the time on a consistent basis. I try, and I I truly want to be that person who sees all the time. But I know that I have times when I fall short. I know that I'm not always patient. I know that sometimes people drive me to distraction and I lose my love glasses. Sometimes deliberately. But I pledge to you that I am going to keep trying to be a better person, trying to wear those glasses more often, trying to be the one who sees, not the seeing one who needs to be blind. And here's the deal, when I fall short, I'm looking at all of you to bring me back. Because I'm hoping that you are going to be striving to be the people who see just like me, and maybe you'll be having a better day than I am. And you'll get me back on track. Or maybe I'll get you back on track. But we do this together. And then maybe we become the light of the world. Amen.